Hi there, and thanks for joining us. I'm Alex Coulombe, Creative Director of Agile Lens, sister company to Fisher Dax in New York City. And today I am so excited to be joined by two individuals who are doing so much to push the opportunity envelope forward for theater makers all over the world, Ari Tarr and Brendan Bradley. Today we want to talk about virtual reality, augmented reality, and other digital innovations that we believe should not be thought of as anything that has the potential to replace all the wonderful aspects of theater we have right now, but should be thought of as additions to your theater maker toolbox. The same way you might think about using a follow spotlight or a stage lift or a dragon costume. You don't have to use it, but you can and should know what the utility is. What's this, you ask? You want to know how I'm a dragon right now? Well, this is just a little $15 piece of software called FaceRig. It works with just about any webcam and has a variety of characters you can use right out of the box. Just one example of a tool you can use to spice up an otherwise boring Zoom call, or anything else you might use for a live platform. Boy, this is fun to play with also. Bah! And it's really easy to switch up characters too. I mean, who doesn't want to be a demonic burger, whatever this is? Okay, let's resize myself here. Beep. It's a fun trick. You're gonna learn more about OBS. But without further ado, let's do the first talk. Who's the first talk? I'm the first talk. Let's get started. Okay, here we go. I got my presentation behind me, and I can also change my size. There's no reason for me to be this big, so I can go, whoa, smaller, or bigger, smaller, bigger, smaller. Let's go smaller, and just kind of hang out here in the corner. Hi, as I talk about our topics for today, which include what is XR? For anyone who's not familiar, we'll go over the terminology of everything. We'll go over who I am, what am I doing here, that whole kit and caboodle. We'll go into a couple early case studies of when I started to realize the utility that XR could have for standard theater productions, and then of course we'll lead that into how XR is incredibly useful for virtual productions. All right, what's XR? Well, the X here can be a bit of a variable. You remember math. It can be a V or an A or an M. V for virtual reality, A for augmented reality, M for mixed reality. And the way that people typically define this, though the definitions are always changing, is virtual reality is the idea of putting on a headset and having your entire world blocked out so all you see is a virtual environment, like this nice little Oculus commercial. And augmented reality is when you're overlaying digital content on top of the real world, like Snapchat or Pokemon Go. Often it's ideal if you can have your digital content respond to the real world, like a Pokemon hopping off a table or being hidden behind a tree. And that just helps everything to feel more believable and help people suspend their disbelief, right? All right, let's get my theater and tech bona fides out of the way real quick. Been approaching this from a lot of different angles for a lot of years. Back in school, I was studying architecture. I also co-founded a theater group, and you can imagine we had pretty cool set designs and whatnot, which was also a lovely way to think about when crafting a virtual experience, how it's like set design in that you only need to create as much as the audience is going to see, right? My thesis involved designing a giant theater, kind of an immersive theater sort of experience. You had the audience in the middle and stages all around. That was nuts. Also good prep for thinking about more immersive spatial experiences. And then I came to work after a few other architecture firms at a lovely place called Fisher Dax Associates, which, for those who don't know, you should because it's a major sponsor of TCG, designs theaters all over the world, and then also ends up being involved in a lot of the custom productions inside. This is Circle and Square. So we started to use virtual reality in late 2013, early 2014 for theater design, and it was a really useful way to jump around to different parts of the room and say, okay, what's the view like from row Q, seat 13? And what happens if we change different design options? And that led to taking some of those ideas and using them for like architectural projection, like this project with the late show Stephen Colbert and Bravo Media, figuring out what the architectural projection design should be for the dome of the Ed Sullivan Theater. Around then, I also started to become really passionate about showing how this could be useful as a tool for anyone who deals with design, architecture, or theater. And that also extended to my own children, where we started to create our own little education podcast, videocast called XR Dad, where we often talk about and share how we are teaching our kids valuable skills, especially creative ones, using these new tools. So, for anyone who right off the bat is thinking like, you know what, I just like regular theater stuff, I don't want to do anything crazy, I want to make sure you understand that even if you still plan on focusing entirely on theater in a space, these tools are still useful to you. So, workshopping, rehearsals, guess what? You can do something very similar in VR. So this is Alive in Plastic Land. This is the kind of super group that myself at Agile Lens and then some other amazing folks put together as we spent about 2 years figuring out how to create virtual performances inside high fidelity. You'll hear more about that soon. From the set design and production design side, with Fisher Dax Associates, we had a very early opportunity with Park Avenue Armory and Kenneth Branagh's Macbeth to actually think about a number of different things using VR. The sight lines, different railing options, the set design, the actor blocking, the lighting design, and being able to figure all of this out very quickly before all the custom theater stuff over here was built really helped make everyone's lives easier. So that was a great previs tool. At TCG back in 2017 in Portland, we had a wonderful demo going where we got to show set designers, costume designers, what it's like to take a VR tool like Tilt Brush, which allows you to sketch inside VR, and then place a sketch into a virtual theater. So you can start to rapidly iterate what it's actually like to get a design you make into what will finally be a built space. And then Cirque du Soleil has had a number of really exciting demos. This one was a Microsoft build, Google Cirque du Soleil Microsoft build, and you'll see a really incredible video where they are basically walking through a Cirque show and having all of the elements of it appear on stage as they discuss it. At one point, they even bring in one of their key collaborators from Paris and say, hey, what do you think of this? And he's seeing the same thing they are. So this, as a remote collaboration tool, even for something like Cirque, which of course is going to be a real physical show, can be incredibly useful. And then for our own studies, we've, with Fisher Dax, been designing real theaters. And then, of course, once we're done with that, we have a virtual model of a real theater and can start to do things like place things inside of it, not just sketches, but real set designs, and start to think about what it'll be like for set changes, lighting, actor blocking, all the things I've mentioned so far. And then ultimately the goal where we're headed with this is being able to use some of these tools to allow, imagine if you can, one person inside a theater with an augmented reality headset seeing all of their collaborators who are not actually there projected into the space almost as holograms, because anyone who's not physically there could be using a virtual reality headset to actually be in a virtual version of the space. So you can have a really meaningful multi-user collaborative experience with anyone who's helping to put a piece of theater together, even if all of you can't be there at the same time. And that extends to the director, actors, production designers, you name it. So, extending on that notion for all of us that are trying to figure out ways to create compelling theater remotely, can these tools actually be useful for an entirely remote show? And the answer, of course, is yes. So I'm just going to go through a few examples here of theater projects that have used this technology in an interesting way as part of the end product. Starting off with the Royal Shakespeare Company, they took the speech 7 Ages of Man from As You Like It, and then volumetrically captured an actor, which is when about 30 times per second, you're basically creating a 3D model of someone, so it plays back and it just feels like there's a little hologram of a real person there. So they took the actual very vivid actor performance there, and then added some digital elements. So as the speech is going and talking about, the arc of a person's life, you're also seeing a tree grow in the background and then eventually die. And it's a short piece, but very compelling. The greenery you're seeing up here actually helps with the set dressing. So the augmented reality experience through the Magic Leap headset, it actually appears there. So it's also using the context of the real environment to play back. The Grinning Man is a similar idea, but done at a much grander scale. So this is all being done with motion capture, which is how you typically see characters being done for big movies. If someone's playing an alien or something like that, they'll have their body motion captured and then projected onto a digital character. Here, they actually did scans of all the actors in costume and then mapped their motions onto the scanned versions of themselves, which is much more lightweight than volumetric capture like what the Royal Shakespeare Company did. So here you actually can have, the entire ensemble of the musical for The Grinning Man, and that can play back in real time. So I got to see this at South by Southwest last year. Still hasn't been released publicly. But what basically happened here was they paid the actors and the crew for a day of the show and brought them into this motion capture studio, had them give a full performance, and now they have that data. They have the entire performance from all the actors that can be distributed out as, in theory, a full show in many different forms, whether it's something that uses VR, AR, or just becomes another way to get different camera angles for the show. It's a really valuable resource because even though these actors may never do the show again, there are now many different ways to represent it and also distribute it, earn money from it, all that good stuff. Last year at TCG, we featured an Oculus Go experience from the Commonwealth Shakespeare Company called Thy Father's Spirit, which was a 360 Hamlet experience that was staged specifically for someone that could look around while the show is playing back. It's 1 hour, it's available on YouTube. You don't even need VR to see it, though that is certainly the most compelling way to check it out. And it's certainly one way to gather an infinitely sized audience by basically saying, okay, 360 camera in the middle, we're going to do the entire performance around, and then you can distribute it in any way you want. Chained to Victorian Nightmare is basically Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, but with all of the happy Christmas elements removed, which leaves you with essentially a horror experience. This started as somewhat of a VR immersive theater experience. I got to see it at the Future of Storytelling in New York City last year, where you have one actor who plays all three of the ghosts of the experience, but you never, of course, see the actor. You are seeing the avatars, the 3D models of the characters they're playing. So this started life as something that was very expensive, not very scalable, very hard to get tickets to. But now what they've done, which I think is an interesting model, is they've taken, again, kind of like what we just saw with The Grinning Man, they captured all of the motion data from that performance and then released it as a standalone VR experience. I think it's $10, but now, again, infinitely scalable. Anyone can buy that, and then hopefully they're making their money back from the show, which was really excellent. Agile Lens was lucky enough to do a prototype for Samsung for a live-action 360 performance, kind of like Hamlet 360. But while Hamlet 360 was produced and then released, this would be a live streaming experience. So it would be ephemeral and happening simultaneously for everyone, a shared communal theater experience. The mock-up was for a concert, but this, of course, could be a theater experience as well, where you basically have different 360 cameras placed throughout the theater that allow you to get different views. Ideally, you'd have a lot of them on stage, and then anyone who can't actually be there physically at the real show, anyone in the world with a fast enough internet connection could be using their phone or a headset to see the experience live. Recently, Helsinki in Finland, they have a big celebration on May Day of every year, and of course COVID-19 made that pretty much an impossibility. But they were very quickly able to pull together a live show that was attended by 700,000 people. Most of them weren't in VR, most of them were on their phone or on their desktop computer, but it was one shared experience where everyone could basically get an avatar and then watch these live performances on the main stage there. This band called JVG actually was in a green screen studio, and they were streaming the cutouts of the green screen performances into the world in real time. And again, this was an ephemeral one-time experience where everyone got to be in there together, taking part in this celebration. And yes, if you're wondering, like, how can my small regional theater ever do something like this? That must cost billions of dollars. To some degree, a lot of that is true. I show those original case studies mostly for inspiration, knowing what's possible, but also because the prices to do this is all going to come down. That being said, I'd love to show some very extremely cheap ways to do this, such as this little proof of concept we made last year on pretty much no budget. We actually did premiere the first version of this at TCG last year in Miami, and this was called That Kind of Guy, and it was a little looping experience inside the Magic Leap headset. Took place on a little table, a little bit like The Grinning Man from Imaginarium Studios and the RSC experience. We had volumetric capture data as well as motion capture data, and the budget for this basically came down to little Vive trackers, which are about $100 each, so you have one of those for each of the body parts that you want to be able to track. So one for each hand, one for each leg, and then the VR headset is also being tracked. And so that data can then be mapped onto a lot of different avatars. And then the volumetric capture is being done with an old Xbox Kinect from like 2008. And so that you can get used for $100 now. So it was that plus just taking all that data and putting it into this experience. I did of course need to build this out in Unity, but the overall budget for the whole thing is somewhere under $1,000, which is pretty great. Then this was built upon for an experience we made called Ghosted, which is a speed dating experience with ghosts. You swipe right for the ghosts you like, you swipe left for the ghosts you don't like. And this was able to be put together, again, on almost no budget. We had the actors come in, each monologue they give is between like 1 and 4 minutes, and there's 18 ghosts where you're going through and picking, again, which ones you like, and they're volumetrically captured so they really feel like they're there, except for, of course, our little devil friend there who is motion captured. So it was building on everything from that kind of guy, and this premiered at the North Bend Film Festival. It went to the New York City Media Lab Summit. It was at Brooklyn Horror Fest, and we keep finding more and more opportunities to play with this because, of course, since it's an augmented reality experience, you can really play with the idea of these actors being ghosts. They can be semi-transparent. They can go in and out of walls. They can fly away. So we're really trying to take advantage of the medium. In fact, if you look at this image in the bottom left, we used virtual reality to prototype the premiere of this experience. We knew exactly what the venue would be that this would premiere in. It was a brewery, so it was kind of an immersive theater. Everyone's going to sit down in this actual bar that is being used by regular patrons and then have the speed dating experience. So we were able to calibrate everything from how far away the ghosts are from you, to the size of them, to thinking about where to position people in the brewery using virtual reality, even though the final experience was augmented reality. And you can do that with any kind of VR/AR experience. You can use those two different mediums together as tools as part of the same toolbox. So that's especially great if you're ever involved with a site-specific show and you don't know how many days or how much time you're going to get to have in the actual space. You just need a 3D model of it, though. Some version of that. You can do a simple scan, too. Ask me if you need more information about that. Here's what a low-cost, large 360 volumetric capture looks like, where the volumetric capture with the Kinect, you can only really do 180 with that. This is a 360 capture. What you're seeing on the right is my 2-year-old, and then this is just being captured live from the phone. There isn't any editing going here after. He can't actually see me, but it was a fun thing to be able to lock a little hologram of myself there into our little cake tin and then just have it play back. So you'll notice this actually looks quite a bit like me, Angry Me, and it's pretty optimized. It's a pretty useful digital format that can be brought into any experience. Again, just trying to give you an idea of the tools and the capabilities out there. So that's full 360 volumetric capture. Then Alive in Plastic Land, which I mentioned briefly earlier, yes, were these studies about what are the most compelling avatars in VR, what are the most compelling genres of performance. And my collaborators and I, we had several experiences doing live shows with very talented New York City improv performers that anyone in the world could tune into. So you could be there in the actual space and see the real actors with all the equipment on doing their live show. But then if you also saw either in VR or in the projection behind them, you would see that they're changing characters, they're flying, they're changing scale. And it's a really compelling way to use the medium. And of course, because there's always some kind of bugs when you do this thing live, these talented improv comedians could yes and all of this. They could keep moving through the show even if things were going wrong a little bit, versus if you're doing Shakespeare and your arm starts twitching, that can kind of ruin the mood. That eventually led to a piece that we were able to bring to the Venice Film Festival last year, which was scripted. So it was all this improv work, and then taking a lot of what we'd all learned from that, a writer, Mac Rogers, was commissioned to write a script that basically took all of the things that we loved so much about the improv work, such as scaling, changing avatars, flying, and then we were able to have this show over in Venice, which, by the way, I never actually went to Venice for the show. I was able to do set design changes with props, all of those elements remotely from my home, which is where I am right now. All I had to do was log into the platform, which was high fidelity. You'll hear more about that from Ari soon. And I could do things like, adjust elements of the set design or the lighting 5 minutes before the show was going to start. Or if an actor inside the virtual experience dropped a prop in a weird place, I could turn invisible and fly on stage and move that prop, all from the comfort of my own home, even though the actual show was taking place in Venice, which was pretty cool. And like the previous shows, anyone in the world could tune in live every day when this live show is going on in VR or just using their computers, and that's a pretty nice level of accessibility. By far, it's always the most compelling to see these kinds of events in VR because you actually feel like you're there, but the fact that we're now at a point where you can also see just a 2D version of these kinds of experiences on your phone or on a computer screen is pretty great. The Untitled is a really amazing VR experience. It's the closest to immersive theater that I've ever personally experienced in VR. There are live actors in here that have been being paid all through COVID-19, which is pretty incredible because they are all at their home putting on Oculus Quest headsets and acting as different characters in here. Now, what's kind of cool about how they're using the medium here is that when you go into the Under Presents and have this wonderfully built out world with all these little details, is you will see performances going on, and you might not know at first if that performance is live or if it's looping, because they can also just like record a performance and then have it play back. But then, of course, if there's a moment where an actor turns to you and starts interacting with you, and there's this really incredible one-on-one experience, then, of course, you know it's live. And the mystery of whether or not that's happening is pretty amazing. And they originally were just going to have a 3-month run for the actors. I think it was going to be January to March, and that keeps getting extended. So they still have all the actors from Piehole in here right now, which is delightful. And here's just what it looks like when the actors are putting on the headset and they get to do things like change their costume and adjust other aspects of what they're playing as. This is a little bit of what the world looks like. Pretty cool. So just to briefly touch on how quickly this kind of work can be done, we had a piece at the MIT Reality Hackathon that was built from scratch over 2 days. This was myself and a few other interested parties. I'm not going to say like VR experts because some of them hadn't used these tools much at all before, but we were able to build over 2 days a cross-platform narrative experience that would have people in VR or AR at the same time viewing the same story from 2 different scales. We had this child view in VR where everything was really big and frightening, and you have a teacher played by me yelling at you, which is very intimidating. And then you have this kind of zoomed out God's eye perspective where you see a little bit more about everything that's going on behind the scenes. And we really wanted to have the people watching this experience engage with each other afterwards and talk about what they thought of the story, since they got slightly different versions of it from slightly different angles. And that's a really exciting platform now that we can continue to build out into, any experience where it might be interesting to have different versions of the same story, especially if we can take advantage of the differences between augmented reality, where there's some real environment elements, and virtual reality, where you can, of course, change everything around them. So to wrap up here, I really just want you to think about the possibilities of what you can do with these tools. The possibilities are endless, and this is the very earliest days of this medium. We're at like the 1910 level of where cinema was at that time, for example. So for anyone who doesn't know, this is Calvin and Hobbes. It's my favorite comic book of all time. It's about a 6-year-old boy who has a stuffed tiger named Hobbes. And when Calvin and Hobbes are playing, Hobbes is a real tiger doing amazing things with him. But when there's like adults around, they just see a stuffed tiger. And so there's this whole world of imagination that's happening for Calvin that is not happening for anyone else. And I kind of love the idea that you could have a theater show that at its surface is basically a minimalist black box studio theater production, where you might see almost no set, almost no actors, let's say even just one actor, doing a very minimalist piece of theater. But when you put on the virtual reality headset, you're seeing a lot more. So you could be also virtualizing this entire experience in VR too, where you might go from this kind of experience where you, of course, want to have everyone in the same space at the same time. This is Julian Bull, by the way, to something that is a little bit more social distance friendly, where you are taking away the actual audience inside the space and then putting them into a remote world where maybe you have everyone watching an experience represented by, say, tiny dots. And what that allow you to do is to get really close to the actors and really start to understand the nuance of their performance. And the actor could be aware of where all those little audience members are as, say, floating lights, but then you aren't blocking sightlines for each other or anything like that. And of course, you could even start to become a participatory part of the experience. Maybe there are times when you want all of you to fly to one side of the room or the other side of the room, and that could all be part of the show. Depends how much you like to be participating in a performance when you go to see it. All the same questions about participatory or interactive theater apply in VR, and for better or for worse, there's far more opportunities to let the audience really go crazy in there. And yeah, as I was saying, like, you can start to get really close to performers. Back in 2008, I was studying abroad in London, and I had this wonderful opportunity to see 25 different West End, national, off West End theater shows, almost always from the first or second row. Our professor had these wonderful connections, and it made such an incredible difference to me to be able to see these world-class performers that close. So different from, of course, being in the nosebleed seats in the back of a house. And the idea that virtual and augmented reality might allow for more people to have that kind of experience is really exciting and wonderful to me. And then you can also think about this idea of where you bring everything together. So imagine that you have a show where there's like the VIP tickets that are very expensive, where that's the people who actually get to come to the theater and actually be there. And I say very expensive also because maybe there's social distancing going on and you actually do need to keep everyone 6 feet apart the whole time. So let's say it's an immersive theater experience where you have people walking around. And maybe at one level you have that minimalist kind of thing I was talking about with Calvin and Hobbes, where you're just seeing the actors. Then you can have a step up where some of the people there are wearing augmented reality glasses and they can see holograms of other actors, maybe ghosts, maybe people who aren't there, maybe imaginary elements, maybe even the audience. And then of course you have that third tier that would be the most accessible, which is the live audience participants who are just putting on a virtual reality headset or watching the show from their computer and still get to feel like they're involved. And that's part of this simultaneously vibrant theater experience that we all love so much. So all of these tools can start to layer on top of each other. And learning to use these tools reminds me a little bit of what it was like for my kids to go from learning to draw on a 2D surface to drawing spatially in VR, where of course you can do so much more in there. And they're not that different. As theater makers, you all have the spatial narrative training and wherewithal and tools to be really meaningful contributors to this emerging medium, and you can make this medium work for you with the stories you want to tell. So in summary, I just want everyone to understand that these are tools that can be useful for all the same kinds of theater that we've been doing for hundreds of years, and making sure that everyone knows exactly what that show is going to look like when it's on stage. But it's also useful for new augmentations of theater and a new version of what that can be, especially for widening audience and expanding the narrative, like light through a prism, having the same narrative have many different forms and potential revenue streams as well. Technologists, there's a lot of cool people making this incredible technology and these tools, but they need artists. They need people with creative visions to help guide the best way for this technology to develop. So it's a symbiotic relationship, and the more we can all be talking to each other, the better. As I mentioned, the theater skills you have, wonderful translation into XR. Unfortunately, film was the first place that a lot of people went to when they started to think about virtual reality, but of course, you don't have frames and cuts and wide shots and close-ups in VR, anything like you do in film. But theater has always been spatial, and so it's a much more relevant narrative art form for this medium. You know, the ideas of set design and lighting and guiding the eye in really clever, stagecrafty ways apply so much to VR and AR. And then, yeah, yes, there are very expensive versions of what goes on here where you might want to try to apply to Google or Facebook to get a grant, but there's also wonderfully cheap scrappy ways to build these stories using readily available tools, some of which are not that expensive. And just want to make very clear, always happy to help anyone out figuring out what they can do in a sub $1,000 budget or whatever the case may be. And yes, again, please, you're going to hear this from Ari, you're going to hear this from Brendan, but please come help us explore this medium. We need you. It can only progress so far without the kind of research and knowledge and tools and skills that you all possess. So come help us with this. And that's it for me. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that so much. And let's zoom out and get ready for our next presentation. Let's get rid of normal me. And now I get to be a tiger in the woods, because why not? Our next presenter is Ari Tarr. He's going to focus on his wonderfully storied history with virtual reality, from early experiments to forming his own company focused on live VR performance, to his direct experience as the lead host of Adventure Lab. What's Adventure Lab? Well, you're going to find out, but suffice to say, it's very cool. He gets to act from the comfort of his own home. Without further ado, take it away, Ari.
My name is Ari Tarr, and I'm an actor and director with a background in immersive design and technology. And 6 years ago, I entered the Silicon Valley startup industry to investigate the applications of virtual reality to live theater. And I am really excited to tell you today what I've learned, the current state of this industry, and where I think we're going next. So today, I am the lead host and VR acting consultant for a company called Adventure Lab, one of 2 immersive theater platforms available in VR. And this is a team comprised of former Pixar executives and a director of third rail immersive theater projects. And the shortest way that I can describe to you what it is that we've created is Uber for actors. So to experience this, you download the app and jump into what can be described as a hybrid immersive theater / VR game / animated film with 1 live host and 4 players. And I do this from the comfort of my own home in a VR headset. Now, theater is hard to produce at the best of times. And I know particularly right now, we're all asking ourselves a lot of really hard questions. But I think that VR holds the key and the tools to not only help theater survive in the future, but to thrive, even over other entertainment platforms. Now, this begs the question, does it help us when we are so disconnected by the tiny screens on our phones to actually literally take those screens and put them over our eyes? And to answer that, first, let's talk about science fiction. Now, in the 90s, there was a book that came out called The Diamond Age, which talked about racting. And this is how future theater companies were the most popular form of entertainment, where people didn't consume passive 2D media. They consumed what's called a ractive, which is some kind of game, theater, film hybrid, when audiences all over the world would compete to purchase the time of popular actors to interact with, so much so they even forgot what passive media was. Now, VR and theater can be used for a small, intimate performance. A VR show doesn't have to happen only in a virtual space that is shared over the internet. It can happen in a real-world space with a relationship between an actor and an audience member. The only problem with that, as Forbes so carefully pointed out, is that it's not really commercially viable. It doesn't scale. Now, that hasn't stopped some incredibly innovative work being done at mostly film festivals like Tribeca and Cannes and Sundance, with really sensitive work being done by the National Theatre in the UK. So in 2016, I co-founded a tech startup with the mission of creating the world's first scaling virtual reality theater platform. Live actors could control the world in real time in response to player input, and the show was sent to Facebook, where people watching there could control characters and also interact with the show. Now, in order to secure the funding needed to build the architecture of this, we needed to convince investors that the current VR hype wave would lead to such popularity of VR that this kind of entertainment would be inevitable. That, or that this tech would be needed to replace live theater events in the chance that they would become no longer available. Well, in 2016, neither of those things had happened yet. And like many others, we were not able to secure funding at that time. Now, in 2012, I saw a massive convergence with the popularity of immersive theater, finally, but with the smash hit of Sleep No More, and also Then She Fell. Now, this happened to coincide with the release of the very first consumer virtual reality headset, the Oculus DK1, that was kickstarted on the promise of cheap cell phone screens combined with computer gaming graphics cards. Now, traditionally, immersive events have not been very available. They have been only maybe yearly during folk festivals, like the medieval pageants, but the aristocracy would invest lavishly on exquisitely designed immersive events called the courtly masques, for instance. So, similarly, at that time, the only way to make a living doing immersive design was as private events for brands. However, that would allow us to fund experimentation with immersive theater and new technology that we could then put in smaller theater productions or take as immersive installations to festivals. And yes, standing on top of your own projection mapped head feels as narcissistic as it sounds. Now, in my background studying VR acting, I've found the most useful disciplines have been things like mask, puppetry, clown, and improv. And studying those, there was a question that seemed to keep coming up for me, and that was, what are the minimal expressions a live actor can use to increase the feedback loop of empathy between them and an audience? Basically, what's the smallest amount that can make an actor increase the human connection? Also, studying immersive design, I kept finding, which we called at the time site-specific theater or device theater, combining it with multimedia or intermedia and physical theater. A lot of the questions we would ask ourselves is, what kind of theater design would we create were we not bound by the limitations of a black box? Now, surprisingly, there are professional, what some would call ractors out there. They're gamers, and they're successfully using the game streaming platform Twitch combined with a VR program called VR Chat, which I'll explain in a second. But they have thousands of live paying immersive theater viewers to watch them in real time. Now, most of these creators are from the gamer community, so they come with that kind of baggage. At best, it's not great, and at worst, it's borderline racist and misogynist, unfortunately. But there are a few exceptions. To an interactive show at a knockoff Harry Potter magic school where you can jump into the viewpoint of any of the characters, or, my personal favorite, live international b-boy dance battles in VR. Incredible. What they use to do this is what's called a metaverse, another sci-fi word. But essentially, all it is a version of the 3D internet, or as the tech startup community calls it, social VR. And there's lots of examples of this in the cyberpunk genre. Whoa. Now, I collaborated with a different metaverse that was more focused on theater called High Fidelity. In 2018, I built an interface that translated an existing immersive theater show that I had assistant directed and written and was hosting to translate it one-to-one in VR with people in headsets able to visit a recreation of an 1880s neighborhood and talk to a few actors populating an entire neighborhood of characters. Now, what they use to do this is what's called a metaverse, another sci-fi word. But essentially, all it is a version of the 3D internet, or as the tech startup community calls it, social VR. And there's lots of examples of this in the cyberpunk genre. Whoa. Now, I collaborated with a different metaverse that was more focused on theater called High Fidelity. In 2018, I built an interface that translated an existing immersive theater show that I had assistant directed and written and was hosting to translate it one-to-one in VR with people in headsets able to visit a recreation of an 1880s neighborhood and talk to a few actors populating an entire neighborhood of characters that would switch between 3D recordings of those actors and live interactive story moments where conversations with the audience members would eventually change the outcome of the show. Now, we did some really great experimentation, finding that we could create large spectacle events not possible in reality and combine them with very intimate, human-connected moments. Now, one of the problems with creating theater in a metaverse is that it's not designed to be a performing arts platform. It's designed to be a platform for socializing with your friends in VR. And there's a lot of competition in that space, including, for better or for worse, Facebook, which is releasing its own metaverse at the end of this year. Now, High Fidelity has focused on theater. And if we're looking at the history of metaversal theater, it goes all the way back to 2003 with the program Second Life, which was not in VR, but hosted many classical theater performances. The metaverse AltSpace VR has focused on comedy. VR Chat, as we discussed, has focused on gaming. Another outgrowth of Second Life, Sansar, has now recently pivoted to music festivals, replacing those that were canceled. And finally, Neos VR is doing really fascinating work with creating immersive, interactive films. Really interesting work. Now, a lot of companies have sought to fill the niche of a platform for creating VR theater. One of them, the one that really had the most funding and the most promise, was called Mindshow, which unfortunately closed its doors and stopped the business last year. Unfortunately, this software is still beholden to the tech startup and gaming business cycles. One of them that's actually managed to survive is called Flipside. And it's one of my favorites, which is a Canadian company. And here's a small sample.
The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them.
Now, do I think this is ready to replace traditional theater? So much so that in a few years, audiences will forget what it is entirely and start wandering on stage to have an interaction with Hamlet? No, I don't. But I do think that in combination with streaming tools that are focused on the performing arts that can replace Twitch, like this one, Caffeine, in combination with something like Flipside, that this is a completely new set of very, very powerful tools that are worth investigating. So let's talk about hardware. Currently, right now, the headset that we use for the Under Presents and for Adventure Lab is the Oculus Quest, which is the minimum in hardware. Please don't buy the Oculus Go. It's $400. It's totally accessible, and it's built on mobile technology, which means it's totally self-contained. Now, there is a more expert rig out there called the HTC Vive Pro I. It's about $1,500 plus a $300 add-on for full body motion capture, and it's actually able to record the very, very subtle saccades of your eye, something really, really needed to build that empathic rapport with another person. And just around the corner, they're releasing the lip module to fully record and transmit the full range of human facial expressions. Now, do I think that VR can enable a theatrical renaissance? Well, let's look at the obvious answers first. Firstly, it takes away all of your venue rental costs and permitting, which for somebody trying to produce an immersive theater production in a downtown metropolitan area is a huge obstacle. It takes away your construction cost for set and costumes. Mostly you're just doing design, and storage is done on a hard disk. This allows you to rehearse and perform from anywhere, not to mention view from anywhere, which overcomes one of the major obstacles to theater, which is just getting people out of the house these days, even before huge disasters. And of course, you're not bound by the laws of physics or by traditional theater structures. You have a whole landscape or a whole new dimension to play with. So one of the questions that I asked at the beginning of this talk was, can you actually have an empathic connection while wearing a VR headset? And I would say unequivocally, yes. In my experience, by eliminating the amount of information, but increasing your amount of sensitivity, you can even heighten the amount of emotions that are exchanged between you and an audience member, even more so than in real life. This has been true, especially when we've got a lot of great feedback at Adventure Lab from women. They enjoy the experience most of any VR experience they've had. And VR has a lot of problems with retention of women users. They don't really feel comfortable in the space. Now, having an emotional actor to welcome them in that they can trust and build a relationship with apparently solves that problem. You can have a platform for international collaboration. We have a whole team working around the country and many members around the world working on these projects, and that's been really informative and is changing the nature of how we create theater. What does it mean when you can change your race like you change a costume, or even your species? These are just questions we're beginning to scratch the surface of, and there are so many more unexplored expressive possibilities with this medium. Now, when any technology comes along, it needs a generation of brave people to pick up those tools and start innovating. And there are not enough theater creators with a background like the people watching this talk have. So I strongly encourage you to be brave and let's forge new worlds together. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for that, Ari. And anyone who wants to actually experience the Adventure Lab show, you can sign up at the link below. Ari's primary sessions are Thursday and Friday, with other shows during the week for press or investors. I got to do it the other week, and it was an absolute blast. Next up is Brendan Bradley. Let's change avatars for fun. Great. Brendan's going to take us home with a very cool presentation that will spark your imagination with what is possible both with the VR space and the streaming community, and why he's so passionate about making theater as accessible as possible to the widest audience possible, not just the people who can travel to a local venue. I'm proud to present Brendan Bradley, Scrappy Storyteller. Take it away.
Hey there. Thanks for joining me today. I want to thank TCG and Alex Coulombe for setting all this up. Obviously, I'm a little disorganized right now, so we're going to ignore that and come back to it later. And first, in 1910, Mary Albus established an arts colony outside of Illinois that sparked a movement to establish experimental, non-commercial, not-for-profit dramatic arts centers in regional communities across the nation. Now, about 90 years later, I was a directionless, quiet skater kid from North Carolina when my mother drove over an hour to take me to open auditions at Raleigh Little Theater. I was somehow cast in 2 productions, thanks to probably the worst Shakespeare monologue anyone has ever done. The first was an interactive children's play where my brother and sister delighted in throwing things at me on stage. And the second was Master Harold and the Boys, a seminal work about South African racism and apartheid. And after the show every night, we had talkbacks with the audience. And I remember seeing firsthand the power of live theater to inspire and educate a regional audience. See, the single limiting factor in my history when it comes to storytelling is access. Access to resources, access to funding, access to audience. See, I didn't grow up with the luxury of being able to discern between what is and isn't real theater. My parents drove me hours to give me access to a small community playhouse. I produced my first play because my high school didn't have access to an auditorium at the time. And I've spent the last 2 decades creating independent stories in almost every medium across 3 continents, all in pursuit of access to new tools, new techniques, and new collaborators. So when I found myself in a position to finally give back thanks to a random 3-year job, I approached my alma mater, New York University, with the single greatest gift I could think of: access. I wanted to establish a grant that would identify student productions that needed a piece of technology and, simple enough, give it to them. I did have two conditions. The first, that the projects were student-driven, and the second was that they involved cross-departmental collaboration that would break down the silos of 20th century dramatic arts education. Okay, Brendan. The university had no idea what I meant. Admittedly, I had no idea what I meant. But my proposal finally landed on the desk of Ruben Polendo, who had just returned from the Abu Dhabi program, integrating new technologies into live performance. Ruben suggested expanding my grant into an incubator and nominated several students from across different departments to collaborate on different projects. After 2 successful seasons, Rachel Friedman approached me about turning the lab into an actual course at NYU. We approached 3 survey instructors from real-world use cases using live technology for live performance. First was Broadway HD to archive Broadway shows, Hani Ahern, who's dealing with networked environments, and finally Michelle Cortez at Facebook's virtual reality experiences. We could have never predicted that the week after the students got their headsets, the entire world would become virtual. The trend lines that we'd been anticipating for the next 3 to 5 years had suddenly become the only way for businesses to survive the next 3 to 5 months. Now, one of the core philosophies of our lab is to insulate the students from the expectations of a final, polished production. They have the rest of their careers to deal with client deadlines and demands and budgeting. So instead, their final presentations are merely meant to document their exploration and their experience. In the last 3 years, we've seen live motion capture movement pieces, a 3D audio experience, and 2 performance pieces inside virtual reality, challenging the relationship of performer and audience. This is the gift of access in 21st century arts education. It not only benefits our artists, but our technologists as well. By embracing cross-departmental collaboration, our artists inspire and inform the functionality of new technology, and our technologists give our artists an ever-expanding vocabulary and toolkit for the future. In my own work, I've begun using do-it-yourself motion capture and 3D rendering to put me and my actors in multiple worlds within the same story. My latest project, A Tale Told by an Idiot, modernizes Shakespeare's Scottish play inside the world of a virtual reality video game company. Now, the process can be cumbersome due to both technical limitations and the fact that I have no idea what I'm doing. I have crashed multiple computers. But as we struggle with this new reality of Zoom plays and distance theater, we are desperate to preserve synchronous storytelling experiences between artist and audience. What we're all missing is access. Now, I'm not Oprah. This is not the part of the talk where everyone gets a free virtual reality headset and a MacArthur grant. Thinking back to my roots, it's highly unlikely that Raleigh Little Theater is going to call up Facebook's VR division. I am so humbled to share this conference today with some of the brightest innovators in technology that to many of us sounds like science fiction. So I thought my role today might instead be to reach out to my fellow scrappy storytellers, the theater companies that are struggling to survive this moment right now, and empower them with some tools for tomorrow. Perhaps we can borrow from another community that at this very moment is streaming virtual experiences to a synchronous audience and making money doing it. I'm talking about social streaming. From esports to TikTok, we've seen a proliferation of passionate youth creating original content online. Now, you may call it vanity, but I call it vaudeville. The fact is, there has always been an audience for larger-than-life, personality-driven acts for a more casual consumer. Broadway and Variety have borrowed from each other for years. And this moment is no different. So I thought I'd unpack 5 key gifts from the streaming community that theater practitioners could perhaps be using right now. First, free tools. Tech companies thrive on one key factor: mass adoption. They will give away products for free just to onboard more users into their ecosystem. This practice is so prevalent, there's a word for it: loss leader. Let's be honest, none of us had ever heard of Zoom before they gave away the software for free to become the preferred messaging service during this pandemic. Similarly, streamers have been using free tools online to create professional broadcasts for years. I'm using one of them right now to switch between camera angles and throw graphics up on the screen. OBSproject.com is a free visual mixer that allows streamers to switch and composite multiple video and media feeds in real time. We can input this mixer into one or multiple streaming platforms. Various plugins and interfaces allow me to bring in a guest from a video conferencing software, remove my background, add captions, or control the show remotely. If my actors don't have access to a computer web camera or need more control, I've been experimenting with free baby monitor apps to be able to control several virtual feeds in real time. Now, these tools are available for anyone, anywhere, and I see no reason we can't start using them to bring virtual performers to virtual audiences. Which brings us to number 2, synchronous experience. We've all been struggling to define what makes live theater different. And there are plenty of factors, including getting to will call late, or buying cheap wine in the lobby, or giggling for some reason when they remind us to unwrap our candy wrappers before the show. But what I miss most is the synchronicity. You have to be there or you miss it. Streamers are only available live or on replays. In fact, the platform DLive deletes videos after 3 days. Streaming culture really captures the currency of now and multi-streaming with multiple participants for a shared virtual experience. Growing up with every memory digitized, Generation Z values impermanence. This is captured in the philosophy of FOMO, or fear of missing out. We have to begin working to make ourselves and our stories less available, less predictable, less polished, and therefore more valuable. The greater your virtual experience, the more important it is to tether it back to the physical. An example of how I'm doing this right now is I'm clearly controlling the show virtually on my phone. So at any time I could hit the wrong button or my mom could call, and this makes us partners in a synchronous experience. Next up is community engagement. Now, synchronicity doesn't matter if you feel like you're the only one there. It's the ritual of participating with other humans in real time that's irreplaceable. Or is it? I mean, how much do we actually interact with our fellow theatergoers? Is it enough just to know they're there? Is it enough just to know we can't hit pause whenever we want to? What about those conversations we have when we're standing in line for the bathroom or the bar? We have to start thinking about how to represent our audience physically in virtual space. Streaming does this using live chat, polls, and shoutouts. Some channels have a dedicated moderator just responding to people in real time, and other streamers actually shout out certain comments or put them on the screen during the stream. Now, there has always existed a dialogue between artist and audience, but streaming allows us to represent this conversation physically, which builds fan loyalty and more participation, which brings us to the greatest goal of every platform: to keep the viewers logged on. Retention is the most important metric. And this is where theater practitioners should feel inspired. Rather than being replaced, we're getting rejuvenated. Ironically, The faster and better the technology, the greater our reliance on live technique, craft, personality, and showmanship to keep the audience engaged. So the theater community is uniquely qualified to excel in this emerging medium. You can ask any social influencer and they'll tell you that the secret to success is reliability. Putting out a steady stream of authentic, engaging content around your unique voice. You might say something like 8 shows a week. Finally, let's be honest, we don't do it for the money, but we do it for the money. As someone that has written, directed, produced, starred in, fundraised for, given to fundraisers for, and attended a lot of theater, we are very, very bad at monetizing our work. But tech companies, they know how to get that money. In fact, in that sector, you're often fundraising or seeking evaluation long before you put out a product. Streaming technologies have monetization tools that are built in, and it diversifies your revenue stream. Pay-per-view, subscription, licensing, tipping, sponsorships, ad placement, and merchandising. The average pro streamer makes between $3,000 and $5,000 a month on subscriptions alone. Now, I want to be clear. This is a person that has not created the video game. Anybody could play the video game. The only original content is the relationship and the interaction between the gamer and the audience. And the baseline is $36,000 a year. It is fantastic that performers have stepped up in this moment to give back through benefit concerts and fundraisers. But we need to be conscious moving forward about how we communicate and convert our value in this new economy. So the tools are free. The audience is there. They enjoy synchronous experience and engagement, and you can get paid to do it. This ecosystem was built for live entertainers. Last month, the popular DJ Marshmello held a virtual concert inside the video game Fortnite to 10.7 million concurrent viewers. Now, for comparison, the total number of tickets sold to Hamilton is 2.6 million. So the question is not whether people are still going to watch theater. It's whether they're going to watch your theater. And that all comes down to access. So now what? How do we put all this together? How do we give ourselves access to tools so that almost anybody with almost no resources can create live theater experiences right now for this moment? Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Then should the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars, and at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment. Oh, but pardon, and gentles all the flat, unraised spirits that have dared on this unworthy scaffold to bring forth so great an object. Can this cockpit hold the vastly fields of France? Or may we cram within this wooden O the very casks that did affright the air at Agincourt? Oh, pardon, since a crooked figure can attest in little place a million. And let us, ciphers to this great accompt, on your imaginary forces work. Suppose within the girdle of these walls are now confined 2 mighty monarchies. They're high, upreared in abutting fronts, the perilous, narrow ocean parts asunder. Piece out our imperfections with your thoughts. Into 1,000 parts divide on man and make imaginary puissance. Think when we talk of horses, that you see them printing their proud hooves in the receding earth. For 'tis your thoughts that now must deck our kings. Carry them from here to there, jumping over times. turning the accomplishments of many years into an hourglass. For the which supply, admit me, chorus to this history, who prologue like your humble patience pray, gently to hear, kindly to judge our play. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Brendan Bradley. You can find me any of the places online using the handle Brendan A. Bradley. Now go create something.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you everyone for joining us. We hope this has been useful. If you have any questions about any of the work we've shown here today, please don't be afraid to get in touch with us. Throw our contact information all around the green screen here. And please do reach out, any questions. All three of us are thrilled to be part of this community, and we want to help others as well. So thanks again. Talk soon. Goodbye.